Introducing On the Horizon, a podcast by Horizon Resources Cooperative, supporting farmers and ranchers across Northwest North Dakota and Northeast Montana. Join host Levi Hall as he engages with agronomy experts, grain traders, and community leaders, sharing insights to help you make confident, informed decisions for your operations. From market trends to practical advice, we bring you the conversations that matter.
Horizon Resources, solutions for your success.
Welcome back to another episode of On the Horizon. This week, we have Dr. Audrey Kalil back on the podcast. And Audrey and I get to talk a little bit about some of the crop conditions, and we go crop by crop throughout the area. She gives us a little bit of insight about some field days throughout the area and a few other agronomic events that people can attend. And I encourage you to get out there and enjoy a lot of these public events. They are great knowledge swap sessions. So you'll hear a lot of talk about that on the podcast this week. Enjoy the show.
Your engine needs premium diesel fuel that works as hard as you do. Cenex premium diesel fuels are precisely formulated for maximum filterability and biostability to keep contaminants from damaging filters, pumps, and injectors, so your engine runs cleaner, stronger, and longer. Cenex Roadmaster XL, Cenex Ruby Fieldmaster. Better fuels for better performance, period.
Welcome back to another episode of On the Horizon. This week, we have the return of Dr. Audrey Kalil. Welcome back.
Thank you.
It's always fun having you, and you are one of our agronomists that is out on the four-wheeler the most. We have a handful that are pretty active out there. You are one of them. I often think of this phrase that I had received one time where it was never trust a pale agronomist or something. I don't know how to...
Our pets don't count.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for you to get a tan. I still do trust you quite a bit, though. So anyways, I just wanted to touch base on what you're seeing as you've put your hours and miles on the four-wheeler running across these fields so far here. We're recording this one pretty close to release date. It's a couple days before, but not too far. So this should be some pretty accurate feedback on what you're seeing and which kind of areas have you been covering and seeing crops in. But I want to go crop by crop. So let's start with one of your passions. Let's start with the pulse crops, and let's start with peas first.
Okay, yeah. I would say, like many of the crops we're going to talk about early in the season, maybe had some establishment issues with the fantastic crop we had last year. There's a lot of residue on the ground. And so you kind of saw that. And so in a lot of fields, when you're on the road or you're on the ditch or whatever, looking at the field, you're like, man, that looks great. And then you get out into it, it's like, it's a little thin. So that's something that we've seen consistently. Hopefully we have another great crop this year. It's a good problem to have, right? But something that we'll want to look out for in future years, make sure we're managing that residue so that we get good establishment. Peas in particular are so picky with that. They can be very impacted by a thick layer of residue, and they can struggle to get up out of that. I've been scouting recently for any kind of root disease out there. I would say this year it's not been that bad. I was a little concerned early in the season. We had peas coming out of the ground, and then we got some good rains, which was fantastic. We needed that, but that can be good conditions for root rot to occur. So I would say if you think you have that, now is a great time to go and check. Normally, I scout for root rot at the late vegetative, early flowering stages, so we're a little beyond that now. But you can definitely, while they're still green, right, dig them up and look at the roots if you have any concerns about that. So, but overall, I would say I'm pretty pleased. We don't seem to have a ton of issues, at least in our geography, with that this year.
Are you concerned that we're probably nearing the end of flowering stage on peas right now, and we haven't seen a rain for quite a few weeks? I shouldn't say it. We've been spotty with rains, and that's something that we're definitely going to talk about as we talk about these geographies, because it has been so spotty. That Blacktail area has definitely received a lot more rain.
Right.
You get up around the airport, things look pretty good. And then you get out towards where I live, you go east of town, and things are a little bit drier. I haven't been down to Watford City for a couple weeks. Last time I was down there, they had just gotten some rain, but there was still a fair amount of heat stress evident from the highway. Um, so given all that, are you concerned about flowering without having widespread, consistent rains?
Um, with flowering, it's more that heat. You don't want a lot of heat at flowering. That is gonna cause abortion. They don't like that. But at this point in time, we've got pods. And all the fields I've been in this week and last week, we've got pods. So right now we're grain filling. We were hopefully pollinating. It's been actually very mild. It's hard to believe that, it's Wednesday, it's 100 degrees outside. It's hard to believe, oh, it's been a cool season. It certainly doesn't feel like that right now, but
Right.
overall it has.
Yeah.
I was looking at some data on Endon, and I took an average of the last 30 days temperatures, like all the temperatures, day to night, and it was 63 degrees
Yeah.
in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
So we actually should have had good conditions for pollination, and fertilization of those flowers. So right now I'm not too worried about it. Peas are well adapted to our conditions. Can they yield better under irrigation? Absolutely. But you're still going to get a crop
Yeah.
under stressful conditions. That's why we grow them.
Right. So one of the crops that I always liken as a hedge against the weather that I think just loves weather like this are lentils.
Mm.
And so that's what I want to talk about next. What are you seeing on lentil fields? And I know there's a pile of lentil acres out there. We've definitely seen an uptick this year. What are you seeing, and how are you feeling about that crop?
Yeah, so I would say, seeing less issues with the establishment in the lentils. I don't know if that just happens to be what crop they're following or what I've been looking at, but that seems to have been less of an issue in the lentils. I would say the big struggle this year is weeds. And I should have mentioned this on the peas too. Volunteer canola.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, Valor is an herbicide we put down in the fall, and it is a no-go if you're planting canola the next year. So the thought process is you put Valor down in the fall, that should take care of your canola. Well, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And I think it has to do with when that seed is germinating. Probably there was a lot more canola seed in that field,
Sure.
or in some places, I guess, camelina. Um, but once you got beyond that window where the Valor was controlling everything coming up in the spring, then you've got that late crop there. And in the heat, under warm conditions, it can start to grow. So some folks are saying, well, there's canola in my lentils overnight.
Yeah. And it was
So
too.
they start to flower.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you see them. Yep.
Yeah. And that volunteer canola is always so thin and wispy, and
Yeah.
and you can spread that out a lot more. And then when you have that drastic change of color, there's some around my house that I've seen that where it went from a really nice, clean looking field of lentils to yellow.
Yeah.
And it was like,
Yeah.
where did this come
Yeah,
from?
yeah. But I mean, like we talked about, lentils are just, they can produce.
Yeah.
And, some people be like, it was my weediest field and actually yielded decent, So we don't need lentils to be perfectly clean. Of course, that's what we would want when we go out there, to look nice, clean fields. But that the other plants in there, they can create some spacing in the canopy. I mean, you definitely don't want a mat of lentils. Right? Then we start to get that foliar disease, and, we're losing quality then potentially on our seed or grain, however you're using that crop. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Our intern Sean was looking at some lentil fields on Monday, and he's saying, showing all the canola, but there's actually a good stand in there. It's like, yeah, I mean, it looks like heavy canola from the field. Again, this is another situation where you go and look. It's like, no, there's a decent crop there. It's worth protecting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of canola, there are a few canola fields, but the acres are definitely down this year, noticeably. So obviously there were, on the grain side, the markets weren't really cooperating this spring, late winter, as seed bookings were coming in. Markets didn't look too hot. The fertilizer market was still super firm. It really caused a lot of trepidation and a lot of hurdles for the canola growers. So we saw some of those shifts away. But on the canola acres that are in, and now the market's rebounded, things look a lot more optimistic. Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing on canola, another crop that's flowering during this heat. It does every year. It's always hot in July. This isn't a surprise. So I always, when I get the first call of it's going to be 100 degrees while it's flowering, there's always one of those days. Very rarely do we have 60 degrees and cool rain and flowering goes on for 6 weeks. Like that's
Right.
pretty atypical.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing on canola fields.
For the early planted crop, we're really on the tail end of flowering right now. We've got some pods out there. So I think we could have a really fantastic crop with that earlier stuff. We were on that weed control. Canola is not a good competitor with weeds. So there are some clean, nice looking canola fields out there. I'm pretty optimistic about that crop.
I think that your comment there could be probably broadcast across all the crops. Everything that got planted before that 2-week gap where we had the 4 inches of rain, which was much needed.
Yeah,
Without it, we would probably be dead by now. But
for sure.
since we got that, everything planted before looks really good.
Yeah.
Everything after is the stuff that's maybe limping along a little bit more. So would you say that's a pretty fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a stark difference between the crop that was planted, essentially mid-April to mid-May. I mean, either before the rain or shortly thereafter, and then maybe caught a few rains after they were planted. That crop, I would say, it is in a similar category of rainfall. And then everything late May, especially early June, had an uphill battle with lack of moisture. So we really could have used that moisture over the 4th in a lot of areas. Some places were fortunate enough to get some rainfall in the past week, and I think that will really help push that late crop. But our early crop is still looking pretty good. I would say of the fields I've been in recently, lentils are still hanging on. They're still looking good. Durham's still looking fantastic. Maybe those peas were struggling a little bit for moisture, but mostly in fields with like really sandy ground that had a harder time
The
hanging on to
hilltop.
moisture we were getting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of Durham and spring wheat, let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing in our wheat crops. Obviously predominantly Durham out here. There's a handful of spring wheat growers, but let's talk a little bit about those. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so for the most part, they're looking pretty good. Like again, I think we did a good job of weed control this year. We had a new herbicide come out called Tolvera. A lot of producers using that this year. Very happy with it. Good control of the pigeon grass or foxtail. So yeah, that was exciting to roll out a new product and have people so happy with it. Good reports all around. Again, stark difference early late crop. We do get some fungicide early on in the season with our in-crop pass, and I would say for the most part, that seems to have kept our fields clean. There's a few fields where there's a few lesions on the flag leaf. Maybe we don't have the best conditions for scab right now, but the season's not over yet. And, from the trials I've done in Durham, where I've done head scab trials, I mean, you can see a difference in the leaves.
Yeah.
And those are that's your providing all the food for your grain. So you still want those leaves to be good. So if you are seeing, maybe it's a later planted crop, maybe hopefully we'll get a few showers here and there. Just, my advice to people is keep an eye on those leaves.
Yeah.
If those lesions are traveling up the plant and you're starting to get infection in the flag leaf, we don't want to lose that. That's the powerhouse, harvesting the sun, feeding the grain.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then you were recently, just today, down in the Yellowstone Valley. You went down into that Sidney area. So you had some conversations with our Fairview team and some of the growers down in that Yellowstone Valley. So let's talk a little bit about corn and soybeans and the wheat that we have under irrigation and any of the other irrigated crops down there.
Right, yeah, so the big struggle they had this year was the cool early part of the season. Everything moved pretty slow, but for them, they're warm season crops. They're gonna put on more material the warmer they are, and in the case of corn, it wasn't looking so hot early in the season. There was some evidence of phosphorus deficiency, which isn't as available when you're under cool conditions, but it's definitely growing out of that. Speaking with our Fairview team, they said the corn is looking good. Definitely grew out of that. Same thing in the soybeans. There's some yellow soybeans. So, if you have any kind of nitrogen tie-up or something like that early in the season, soybeans do fix their own nitrogen, but it can take 3 to 4 weeks to really get that nitrogen fixation established. I mean, they have to build that nodule from scratch, right? That's a whole new plant organ. And so in that time frame, if you're not using the starter fertilizer, which can give you a little bit of N, you're relying upon what's in the soil. So it looked a little yellow, but definitely growing out of that, looking perfectly good now. You definitely don't want too much nitrogen on soybean. You can actually hurt yield fertilizing a soybean because then it's not going to form nodules. They're lazy. They're just going to use the nitrogen that's there. And then, come July, that nitrogen's gone.
Right.
And they need the nodules to support yield at that point.
Well, I know it's an exact 1-to-1 comparison and analogy. The sweet corn in my garden also has recently really taken off.
Which is really the important statistic that we watch here.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to talk crop conditions on my garden after this. That is,
Stay tuned.
yeah, that's a pay-per-view though. Yeah,
you gotta subscribe.
Yeah. So one of the other things you kind of touched on disease issues, especially on the durum and spring wheat when we were talking about that. This year, we rolled out the 0% fungicide program. Now, I know I looked at the NDON map before I came down here. It is low susceptibility for Fusarium head blight. So that being said, it maybe isn't the perfect year to have rolled out a program like this, but I, for one, am really proud of the team for getting creative and finding a way to make this work. So the way the program works is any product, not the application of it, but the product itself, you can finance until out into January of next year. And it is at 0%. So yeah, we have a great program. I know that the team put a lot of work into this, and it's a great program. Like I said, we probably don't have the pressure we typically do this time of year, but maybe talk a little bit about some use cases for this.
Yeah, so I would say, lentils are still a strong argument. And so lentils, we're still getting a fungicide application. We're beyond that time frame now, but unless you want to be out there scouting it constantly, the cost per yield benefit on a fungicide in lentils is pretty strong, even in our normal kind of climate. I wouldn't say it's a dry year. This is probably pretty typical for us.
Right.
People have been utilizing the program for their lentil spray. There have been some head scab applications that have gone out. I would say, and what I've been encouraging people to do is not rely 100% on those risk maps. They're our best guess.
Yeah, they're a great tool.
They're great tools, but you also have to be aware of your fields. We had a huge failure of those models in 2016 where, honestly, in retrospect, maybe we should have known better, but we thought these models are made by people who research these diseases, right? They know them in and out. And that is true. And they put a lot of work into the models, but nothing's perfect, right? If there was 100% perfect model, that's not the real world.
Right.
And so what happened was the model is low, no risk, 100% in 2016. And I think everyone hopefully listening to this realizes what happened in 2016, which is huge head scab epidemic. And we just had the conditions for it. Unfortunately, when you make that head scab application, you don't know what the weather's going to bring. We could have a hot, dry July and you're totally golden. Or we could continue to get showers and maybe it's hot at the high of the day, but you have a long dewy period overnight, and that's allowing the pathogen to spread in your grain. So I would say if you've had consistent rainfalls in your area, in your fields, maybe consider that, weight that, or maybe you're growing durum on corn ground where your corn is next door to you. That's a huge risk factor because if you think about all that residue from a corn crop, that's where the pathogen is.
Right.
There's a lot of fusarium on that corn residue. So this definitely applies for our irrigated farmers. I mean, we're essentially creating the conditions for good head scab under irrigation, especially if we're irrigating at flowering when that crop is susceptible to infection. So, and most folks are growing corn or corn is in the area. So I would say if you're an irrigated durum producer, honestly, it just makes sense to put a fungicide on that crop. You're going to have a tremendous yield. You don't want a huge yield of something you can't market.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's very well put. It's a lot harder to market some of those, especially when you get the real high VOM numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
It can be pretty challenging. So yeah, to me, I know it's not a cheap product, but it's a cheap insurance policy. And you can, there's proven yield benefits to it. So
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And when you're on an irrigated environment, you're also creating the climate for foliar disease to travel up your canopy.
Yeah.
So, if you're noticing a lot of yellow leaves in your canopy, go out there and see are there spots.
Yep.
And that's what's causing you to lose yield as well. I would say most of the yield loss is driven by that foliar disease. But your quality loss is driven by your scab.
So you were just down today, I mentioned it earlier, for the field day down in Sidney, and we have another one coming up here in the Williams County area. Why don't you go ahead and talk about what you learned down in Sidney, what you saw, the benefits of a program like that, and if you know any of the details on the one coming up here. I believe it's next week.
Right, yeah. So I was at the field day for the Montana State University Eastern Ag Research Center based out of Sidney. They have an irrigated farm and a dry land farm, and we were at the irrigated farm. They had cropping system studies, so looking at planting date, tillage, residue level for corn, soybean, and wheat in a rotation. So that was in collaboration with the USDA facility there in Sidney. The station agronomist, Chensi Chen, showed us some camelina plots. So that's kind of an exciting new crop in the area. Some of our customers are trying it out. There's a plant in Great Falls that is accepting that biofuels type of purpose. So he talked a little bit about that. It was helpful to have that kind of background knowledge when we have people coming in the door and asking those kind of questions. What does it look like? What does it yield like? That kind of thing. And you really can't replace actually having seen it grow there. They have variety trials. Some of our cropland varieties are that we sell here. They were out in the trials, so we could take a look at those. Some inoculant studies, seed treatment studies. I mean, they're doing really a tremendous amount of work there. And they're also collaborating with the Montana State University breeders, the Durham breeder. They have a new pulse breeder at Montana State. Kevin McPhee retired this year, so we got to meet her. All of this research is funded by our tax dollars and our checkoff dollars. So we are paying for all of this research to happen, and having, relationships with a lot of these folks, knowing they really want to do research that is applicable to us and not just something they think is a good idea.
Right.
So I would encourage you to check out field days. There's field days across the state next week, including irrigated and dry land in Williston. Check it out and then provide your feedback. These studies are really great. I'm going to use them this way, or what would you like to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially giving your input on what you want to see. Otherwise, before we know it, we could be doing strawberry trials out here. Well, that's not really going to help any of our growers. So it's important to have, and I'm not saying we're actually going to get to that. That was a hyperbole, obviously, but
I like strawberry.
yeah, but it is important to keep it relevant.
Yeah.
And so when you're having issues, communicate that with those extension personnel, because they're the ones that are able to take that and put a trial into implementation.
Right. And, the higher ups from Fargo come out here.
Yeah.
Right. So we have these people coming out to Williston that are only here maybe twice a year. So engage with them, right? Tell them how you think things are going, your perceptions of the extension system, right? They really do want to hear that. And I think it makes a difference. We're kind of unique in having this type of facility here in Williston. So I think as a community, it's important for us to take ownership of that and try to drive it to be successful.
Right on. Well, Audrey, thank you so much. I'm sure your newsletter will have information about the field days. So if you're not subscribed to that,
shoot me an email.
Yep, shoot Audrey an email, and we'll get some information out, and hope to see you at one of the events.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot, Audrey.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in to On the Horizon. If our conversation today sparked your interest, make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Stay connected by following @Horizon Resources Co-op on Facebook and Instagram and explore the world of agriculture with us. We're excited to continue bringing you real conversations with Horizon Resources industry partners, member owners, and employees, discovering more about your local neighbors and community friends. Until next time, keep looking towards the horizon.
Horizon Resources, solutions for your success.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be used or considered as an offer or a solicitation to buy or sell commodities. Horizon Resources does not make any representation, warranty, or guarantee as to the completeness, accuracy, timeliness, or suitability of any information contained within any part of this podcast. Horizon Resources does not accept any liability for any loss or damage, including without limitation loss of profit, which may arise directly or indirectly from use or reliance on such information. Whilst the information provided has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, Horizon Resources does not attest to its accuracy or completeness. Horizon Resources reserves the right to change any source without restriction or notice. The information herein is indicative only and is subject to change.